Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anthony Leong. Welcome to Anthology. Today's chapter is called Gossip Monster. This is a story based on my experience of seeing the spirit of gossip while I was in a deep place of prayer. This story changed the way that I saw not just spiritual warfare and not just deep places of prayer and intercession, but it changed the way that I read the Bible. When we're told not to gossip and not to slander, this experience gave me kind of the behind the scenes view of what really is going on when people engage in sin. And hopefully, this is an empowering and eye opening video for you today. So, without further ado, let's get into the story. This story occurred at a time in my life when I was really learning to pray. I was born again in 2013, and I moved into the man who led me to Jesus. His mother, she was a widow. She had a very large home, and she rented out her basement to different people. And I ended up moving into her basement for a time in my life. And during that time, it was so glorious. She would have people over all the time, and they would always be, taking communion and eating with each other and praying and worshiping God. And I would oftentimes go upstairs and I would join them. And these were women who were in their, 60s and 70s and 50s and 60s and 70s and just devoted to praying. And I am so honored that God allowed me to be a part of that in my early years of Christian formation. And I learned how to wait on the Lord in prayer. I learned how to pray for long periods of time. I learned how to press in and move into the place where you'd actually begin to see things in the spirit. It was amazing. It really was amazing. This is a place where I learned to pray. And so in the beginning phase of that, I'd go up and trying to figure out what everyone was doing, why they were doing what they're doing, what the protocol was, like what was going on here. I just loved being with them. This is me. I'm a 19, 20, 21-year-old boy, basically, with a 50, 60, 70-year-old women who are praying. And I'm just like, look, I just came out of the world. I don't know anything, but I'm hungry for Jesus. And so tell me and teach me what you're doing, and much more I learned from just being in the atmosphere than hearing and them teaching me. I learned by way of osmosis. Just being there, I learned so much. It was just like the culture taught me, the atmosphere taught me much more than them just saying, this is what we're doing. So walking with Jesus is just as important as talking with Jesus. Anyways, I'm there and we're praying one night, and I hadn't really experienced a whole lot of visual experiences while I was praying, but this night I did. And this was the beginning of a season in my life where God was showing me what different spirits looked like in the spirit, what they actually look like. You look at, we hear the phrase angels or cherubim or living creatures, and to us, it's words on a page, but these words on a page come from men seeing these beings beyond the veil, so to speak. So there's stuff that exists that just goes far beyond what we comprehend, and I believe people are inspired. And if you look at a lot of horror movies, and I do not encourage people to go watch those because a lot of them are demonically empowered, but a lot of the entities that people see in those movies and that they create, it's actually inspired by real experiences. So anyways, I'm praying one night, and we're praying, and we're deep into the place of prayer. And all of a sudden, I see a vision starts opening up to me, and I go, my eyes are closed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing something. And I'm not having to create it or anything like that. It's appearing to me, and so I'm paying attention. And it's such a unique vision because I see this young man, and he's on one side of the vision. He's on the left side of my vision. And I see this young woman, and she's on the right side of my vision. And they're talking back and forth, and they're talking. And while they're talking, I can tell that he's talking with her and he's engaging with her too long. Like I just knew, like, in the vision, I knew he should have stopped the conversation already. He should have stopped it, but he didn't. And so he kept on engaging. And basically, I also understood that he was allowing her to do a majority of the talking. He should have stopped it, but he didn't. And he kept allowing her to talk, 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 talk. And then because of that, I watched her bend down and all of a sudden she left the vision. I was like, where'd she go? And then she popped back up and she had a bone, a little tiny bone, in her hand. And she threw the bone over the head of the young guy. And it went over his head and it went behind him. And then my vision panned over to see, what was over there. And it was flying in the air and then I saw this little tiny, it looked like a little tiny, tiny, tiny little dog, a little Shih Tzu kind of tiny. It was so small I couldn't make out any of the details. It just looked like a little dog. And its mouth was open, and it eats the bone. And as soon as it eats the bone, I watch this thing grow from this tiny little entity and it gets massive. And now it's like 30 feet tall. It towers over these, because now I can see the two young people, and this entity is like 30 feet tall. It's massive. And I'm looking at it and it looks terrifying. And this is what the description was. It had the body shape of not a golden retriever, a German Shepherd, where its back legs are really short. And this was like its back legs were really short and its front legs were really tall. And it had that body shape of a German Shepherd. It had the tail of a lion. It had the fur of like a beaver slash yeah, it had like the fur of like a rabid beaver. Like the fur was all mangy and mangled, but it was like that. You've seen like beaver fur. And then I looked at its face, and its head was the face of a rat. And then its mouth, it had three sets of teeth, one set and then another set behind it and another set. And the teeth were all messed up. They were all just crooked and whatnot. And there was this green looking slime drooling from it. And I could just tell this thing was a monster. It was just going to eat everything in its path. And then my vision ended and I was like, oh my gosh, what was that? And I had never seen something more hideous, more disgusting than that entity. I'd never seen anything in my life that gross, that deformed, that unusual, that it was just wrong. I just knew it was wrong. And coming out of the vision, I understood intuitively that was the spirit of gossip. And then I began to understand what the vision was about. That this woman was speaking to this man, and she was sharing and talking with him. And in the beginning, it was just talking. But then it got to the point where he stopped really talking and she just kept talking, talking, talking. And she began to engage in gossip. And the right thing for him to have done would have been to stop her or to leave the conversation. But he didn't. And so therefore, what ended up happening is because he entertained the gossip, she bent down and threw this bone, and what she was doing was over his head. That's what I understood. She threw the bone and it went over his head. In other words, what was occurring in the spiritual world was over his head. He did not understand it's a lack of understanding that causes people to allow gossip to continue. It's over their head. They're not really discerning what's going on. Now, there's some people who just love gossip, and that's on the other side of things, and that's disgusting. But there's some people who are naive and don't understand and have to. This vision was giving me insight how to deal with people who are gossiping, who are gossipers. And Paul talks about this in the Bible. So the bone goes over his head, and all of a sudden, this entity that was so small, almost non-existent, you could literally squash it with your foot. It became so overpowering, it would just devour anything in its path. And it was behind the young man. And I understood now this is following him. This is behind him. It's not good. And then the vision ended. So in the Bible, when it says, slanderers, gossipers, murmurers, backbiters, malicious people with malicious intent, to refrain from engaging with them, to not even give them any mind, um, not to pay them any mind. Don't engage in any of these things. The charge there is backed by a spiritual reality that most people don't understand. And this vision gave me insight into, in the spiritual world, that is a world of typology and allegory and symbolism and greater revelation. Because what happens in the spiritual world when we do anything in the physical world is far more real than what we're experiencing here. But because we are living in mortal flesh, because of the fall, our ability to perceive the reality of reality has been dimmed. And Paul says we see through a glass dimly. Unfortunately, it's the way it is. So this is why a lot of times God speaks in visions and dreams and parables and stories and things like that, to illuminate greater revelation. And this was my experience, and this kicked off an entire saga of visions and dreams and different things that God would allow me to end up seeing, that gave me insight behind current circumstances. I began to see demon entities behind current circumstances, and it gave me insight into, oh my gosh, this is what we're in the middle of, and this is how it's working. This is how it's operating. This is how it's spreading, and this is how to deal with it. And I dealt with a lot of different things, and that got me in trouble with people because I was attacking the root of the fruit of people's lives. And the root oftentimes was demonic influence, and people didn't know it. And so, and this plays into the last chapter of Anthology that I just released about a demon dagger, and how God began to give me a heightened use of the gift of the discerning of spirits to understand what people are going through and how to deal with the demonic source of problems in order to see resolution. So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess the point of the story today is, do not gossip. If you're a gossiper, stop. And if people are trying to vent to you, they are trying to explain their circumstances to you, they're trying to, come to a resolution, but they're doing it over and over. The Bible calls them grumblers, complainers, gossipers. And what you need to do if you're in the middle of that situation is crush that. Crush it. Stop it. Literally tell somebody, if there's a pattern there and they're starting to complain, and the way you know that there's complaining and gossiping is no one is ever involved in coming to a solution. They're just involved in talking about what the problem is. Good for you. Anybody can see a problem. A blind prophet can see a problem. Good for you. If you stop there, you become a prophet for the demonic. You are speaking demonically because you never bring in a godly solution. And so, if gone on long enough, these people end up becoming literal false prophets. And that as a long-term process, but that's how that happens, because they only prophesy from the demonic world. They only can speak what is wrong. And they can never come into redemption. They can never come into resurrection. They can never come into resolution. A lot of people don't want that, unfortunately. But if you want to die in the wilderness, if you want to fall short before your destiny, go ahead, gossip, complain, murmur. Because that's what the Bible says. The Bible says that the children of Israel could not enter in because of complaining. Why? Complaining says, if I were God, I would do this differently. Really? So you know more than God. And that's really what complaining is. You saying, I know more than God. That's dangerous. So, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully this was a blessing to you today. If you enjoy this content, visit the link in my bio. You'll be taken to my website where you'll find support options as well as ways to become a patron. Patrons gain access to my dream journal, Knock Tiffany, which is available on my website. There, I share dreams I've had, break them down, and explain how I arrive at their interpretations. The goal is to create an environment where people can come into it and they can begin to sense and experience and pick up, hopefully, catch, we would call it, the impartation to interpret dreams and gain a mind of the spirit that would allow people to understand how dreams are spoken and what God is saying in them. So, and if nothing else, people can get insight into some of the dreams I had because some of them are relevant for the current moment that we're living in. If that interests you, check out the link in my bio. I'm Anthony Leong, ladies and gentlemen, and this is Anthology. Until the next chapter, God speed.